She was too loud, too fast, too curious, and that made her dangerous. Not to criminals, no dangerous to tradition. That's what frightened them most. That sultry Sunday morning, as Pastor Tulliver's voice cracked through the chapel like thunder chasing sinners, every neck twisted toward the woman in pew 4's if her mere breath poisoned the holy air. Nola Quinn didn't flinch, back ramrod straight, hands folded over a scuffed prayer book, dress plain as mud, hair pinned like secrets behind a smile. She could have passed for invisible if last week hadn't happened. At Harmon's Supply and Sundries, Old Man Bricker had leaned in too close, claimed he saw a smudge on her apron. His hand aimed for her waist, but caught a slap so sharp it rang through town like the dinner bell from hell. They said his bifocals bounced off the pickle barrel. Nola didn't say sorry. That was the real scandal. Now Pastor Tulliver stood, fists clenched on his Bible like it might fly off and smite her itself. "There brews among us," he bellowed, "a spirit of rebellion's a woman whose tongue dances where silence belongs, who forgets the grace of submission." No name, didn't need one, all eyes knew who. Nola stared at the cross above the pulpit, lips sealed tight, while the pews hissed with murmurs like snakes under dry leaves. Children squinted, wives elbowed their husbands. Even the choir girls dropped their gaze to hymnals that suddenly seemed very interesting. Beside her, her father, Grady Quinn, sat still as a carving jaw clenched tight enough to shatter a walnut. Her mother, Edith, twisted her lace kerchief like she might unravel the world if she just kept twisting. Nola had known silence before judging stares, sucked teeth, prayers muttered with purpose. But this silence, from God's house, this was different. This was exile painted as piety. When the service ended, no one offered a word. Not a handshake, not a nod. Parents yanked kids aside. Pastor Tulliver turned his back. Old Man Bricker stood in the doorway nursing his cheek like a war wound, grinning like he'd won. Outside, the dry heat of Willowbend clawed at her boots as she walked the road alone. Her family hadn't waited. They didn't need to say a thing. Abandonment did all the talking. But silence felt different that night. It wasn't peaceful. It pressed in from the corners, whispering of all she'd lost, not just reputation, but her place in this cracked puzzle called home. She ran her fingers along the edge of her Bible, cover worn from years of prayers whispered with hope and sometimes grit. She remembered her mama's voice, soft and warm, once whispering while tending a scraped knee, "Blessed are those who are mocked for doing right." Maybe righteousness didn't fit anymore, but persecution, that shoe fit tight. She was tired of being too much for every man and not enough for any of them, tired of hearing how she could be fixed, softened, tamed. She didn't know someone had already seen her, completely, quietly. That night, just as she reached the porch, the front door creaked open. There stood her father, arms crossed in the amber light, eyes crawling over her like inventory. "Dinner's cold," he said, not kindly. "Not that you earned it." She brushed past him, breath held, the air inside thick with boiled turnips and quiet contempt. Her little brothers avoided her eyes. Her mama knitted furiously, jaw stiff, like each stitch held back an outburst. One plate sat untouched on the sideboard. She reached for it. "Do you think people didn't notice what you did today?" her father snapped. "I didn't say a word," she said evenly. "That's the problem," he thundered. "You should have stood and begged forgiveness, owned your shame." "For not letting that man grope me?" His palms slammed the table. Utensils clanged like chimes in a storm. "You talk too damn much. That's why no decent man stuck around. 29 and still under this roof. I'd rather sleep in a ditch than be owned," she snapped. The silence after could have torn wallpaper. Her mother's needles froze mid-stitch. One of the boys let out a gasp like he'd seen a ghost. Grady Quinn stepped forward, his shadow long and heavy. She braced, but he didn't strike. He leaned in, voice gravel sharp. "You're not a girl now. You're a burden. One more outburst, one more embarrassment, and you'll be sent away. I won't think twice." She said nothing, just took her plate to the sink. The roast was cold, but it was food. She ate it standing, eyes on the moon climbing through the branches outside. Sleep was a stranger that night. Her pillow stayed dry not for lack of pain, but because pain had turned to something older, heavier, resignation. She thought of the other women smiling, nodding, folding into quiet corners of their husbands' lives like furniture. She would never be that. Maybe she was broken. Or maybe the world just wasn't built for women who refused to fold. That's when she saw it. A flicker beyond the window, a shadow, still as stone, beneath the cottonwood tree. Her breath caught. He was there. They called him Howrick Cole, half this, half that, all danger. Rode into Willowbend on a coal-black gelding and hadn't said a word since. Some whispered he had Apache blood. Others said he wrestled bears. But one thing was clear, no man crossed him and no woman dared try. Now, here he stood, in her yard, watching. She didn't scream, didn't move, neither did he. In that hush, something passed between them, something that didn't need permission or explanation. And just like that, he melted back into the dark. Nola lay back down, heart a drumbeat of wonder. For the first time in years, the weight in her chest shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. By Monday, the whispers were wildfire. Cole. Howrick Cole. They said he was the bastard son of a frontier scout, or maybe a spirit from the Black Mountains. They all agreed on two things. He wasn't from here, and he was dangerous. He didn't rent a room, didn't sip whiskey at the saloon, didn't park his horse at the church hitching post. He lived past the cottonwoods where the river twisted and the land dipped like a secret locals called it No Man's Hollow. Now, it was his. Nola saw him again that morning while taking the back trail to Bramble Creek, basket in hand with only a book and an apple. She preferred solitude to sermons. She took the narrow path by the crumbled bridge, the one kissed by blackberries and fox prints, and there he was. Howrick Cole. He stood like carved wood, reins in one hand, his mount still, his boots red with dust, face unreadable, but his eyes, those unblinking dark eyes, locked onto hers. She froze. A crow squawked overhead. Her horse jerked. She calmed it with a whisper, heart racing. When she looked again, he was closer. "Morning," she said, barely above a whisper. He didn't reply. She stood her ground. "I know what they say about you," she murmured, mostly to herself. "Same rumours they whisper about me," she muttered. More to the wind than to him. His eyes didn't warm, but the space between them, it changed. Not a smile, not a step forward. But the air felt less like judgment, more like recognition. And then he did something no one in Willowbend would have bet a silver dollar on. He stepped aside. Not a nod, not a word, just a clearing of the path freely, silently, like an invitation made from nothing but mercy. She passed him with careful steps, heart pounding like thunder in her chest. She dared to glance back. He was already turning away, climbing onto that black gelding in one smooth, ghost-like motion, disappearing into the trees once more. That night at dinner, her father grumbled about mongrel blood wandering too close to decent land. Her mother muttered a quivering prayer while her brothers chuckled at something cruel under their breath. Nola said nothing, not about the bridge, not about the silence, not about those dark eyes that had seen her with no judgment, no shame, just seen her. Later, she sat on the porch, the book unopened in her lap, her basket beside her. Above, stars blinked into the sky one by one, and the prairie wind carried secrets across the plains. She listened not for words, but for breath, hooves, the subtle presence of someone who didn't need to speak to be known. He didn't come, not that night. Still, she waited a little longer. She was learning. Sometimes, silence said more than 1,000 sermons. The wind changed just before midnight. It had a taste like rust and rain, like stormwater drawn from a well too deep. It roared through the house like a warning, rattling shutters, brushing against her skin like ghost fingers. She felt it before she heard it. A low, tearing crack like bones snapping beneath the weight of the earth. Then the scream. Not human, a horse. She was out of bed before she had time to be afraid. From her window the horizon bled red, not moonlight fire. Smoke slithered up like a living thing, and the flames danced above the fields. "The barn!" she yelled, and she was already halfway to it. Behind her, boots hit the floor, boys yelling. Her father barked orders and stumbled after her, shotgun in hand like it could fight fire. But it wasn't thieves they were battling. The barn stood like a dying giant, flames already chewing through the roof. Dry hay turned the blaze into a beast, animals screamed, metal creaked, smoke billowed. She didn't hesitate, no question, no pause. She ran into the inferno. Inside, it was madness. Heat bit her skin, smoke clawed her lungs, the cows bellowed, horses kicked in terror. She unlatched stall doors with trembling hands, eyes stinging, sparks falling like rain. A wooden beam cracked, dropped behind her like judgment from the sky. She twisted too fast, caught the blow on her ribs. Air left her lungs. She dropped, coughed, crawled. And then arms. Strong, bare, pulling her out of hell. The cold night air slapped her like baptism. She gasped, clawing breath into her chest. Overhead, stars stared down like indifferent gods. He didn't speak, just laid her in the grass, checked her eyes. Ash dusted his hair, sweat ran down his face, and he smelled of smoke and wild things. His gaze lingered just long enough. Then he vanished, swallowed again by the trees. Her father reached her moments later, red-faced, breathless. "You fool of a girl!" he shouted. "You could have died!" She opened her mouth, but the smoke had stolen her voice. "And who the hell pulled you out? One of your little forest friends?" She said nothing. She didn't have to. He knew, and worse, he hated knowing. By sunrise, the town was already alive, with talk, the fire, the rescue, the quiet stranger, but no one came to check if she was hurt. No thanks, just whispers. Why was he near their land? What was she doing in that barn alone? Did she summon him? Is she flaunting it now? Her father barred her from leaving the house, stood on the porch with his rifle like a guard dog. Her mother prayed loud enough to shake heaven. But Nola sat by the window, hands curled around a mug of cold tea, and thought only of the fire and those arms that pulled her free not to save a damsel, but to rescue a person. That night, she lit a single candle and set it on the windowsill. A thank you, a signal, a flame for the flame. She didn't know if he'd see it, but deep inside her bones, she felt he already had. The bruises faded, the burn along her ribs healed slow, left a tender scar she traced sometimes under her dress, but that wasn't the only mark left behind. The town had always looked at her, judged her, measured her. Now their stares were colder, no longer just amused or pitying, suspicious. She went to Whitaker's store 3 days later, needed flour, bandages. The bell over the door rang, nobody greeted her. Mr. Dunham puffed on a cigar behind the counter, didn't look up. She picked her items in silence. At the register, he finally spoke without looking. "You bring coin today? Or just more trouble?" She dropped 2 silver pieces on the wood. "Trouble's always free," she said, calm as a knife. Outside, the same song, different verse. A woman pulled her daughter close. 2 boys snickered. Sheriff Dallin leaned on a post, watching, always watching. This time, the silence around her was mean. They weren't just judging her choices, they were questioning her purity. When she reached the gate at home, her father stood waiting, arms folded like stone. "You went to town. I needed things. Nothing there worth your soul." She stared him down. "And what's that worth to you now, less than a sack of flour?" He stepped closer, voice like gravel. "Don't get smart. That savage marked you." She didn't flinch at the slur. "Not anymore. He saved my life. You should have let your brothers do it, or died with dignity." She didn't answer, just walked past him, throat tight, fury burning behind her ribs. That night, she dreamed of fire again, but this time she walked through it, barefoot, unafraid. The others screamed from the sidelines, too scared to follow, too proud to ask why she could. At the end of the path stood Howrick Cole, backlit by flame and ash, silent, still, in his hands not a weapon but a flower. She woke with the sunrise. Mist clung to the fields like breath. On her windowsill, beneath where she'd placed that candle, something new. A feather. Long, black, delicately placed. No footsteps, no knock. Just the feather. A message, maybe a question. Would she follow the fire, or stay where it was safe? Later that day, she walked to the chapel at the town's edge. It had been abandoned for years, roof, sagging, weeds growing wild between pews, but there, for once, she could breathe without judgment. She sat up front, not to pray, but to not despair. She was tired of being studied, tired of being named without ever being known. Somewhere out there, beyond the tree line, was a man who didn't ask her to shrink, didn't ask her anything at all. The chapel became her secret. Each morning after sunrise, she brought bread, apples, something small. Each time, she found something left for her in return. A pine cone carved with strange marks, a string of beads, a stone with a perfect ring etched into its center. He rarely showed himself, but his presence was as steady as breath before a storm. She could feel him near, even when the woods held only silence. Then, one morning he was there. She had just stepped into the sunlit clearing when she saw him, seated on the old stone wall that once lined what had been the chapel's garden. His elbows rested on his knees, hat pulled low, posture still like a forgotten sentinel carved from shadow. She froze. He didn't move. A breeze wove between them, lifting the wildflowers at her feet into a gentle sway. She lifted the string of beads from her basket. "Did you leave these?" she asked softly. He looked up. Their eyes met, and he nodded. It was the first time she'd seen his face clearly, no brim, no shadows, high cheekbones, a jaw like cut oak, a thin scar traced across his brow like a sentence someone had started but never finished. His eyes held no threat, only depth. She stepped forward, placed the basket beside him, then slowly sat on the wall, close, but not too close. Enough for company, not assumption. "You don't speak," she said, "but you listen." He didn't blink, didn't nod, just watched her calm, steady, unbothered by her voice, her questions, or her presence. She smiled faintly. "That's rare." The cottonwoods rustled above, whispering stories of old roots and restless skies. A hawk cried from somewhere distant. She didn't feel the need to fill the space with explanations. She'd spent a lifetime defending her laugh, her ideas, her sharpness. Here, it didn't matter. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small cloth bundle. Unwrapping it slowly, he revealed a single white featherclean, soft, bound at the base with red thread. He held it out to her. She stared at it, then at him. "What does it mean?" He tilted his head, considered her. Then, finally, his lips moved, barely, quiet as breath. "Peace." The word hit her harder than a sermon. She took the feather with both hands, fingers trembling. Not beauty, not silence, not submission. Peace. No man had ever offered her that before. She looked into his face, searching not for answers, but for the thing she'd never dared believe was real. "Why me?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He stood, tipped his hat, and walked toward the trees. No goodbye, no promises, just the presence of someone who came as quietly as he left. She stayed long after, the feather pressed to her chest like a shield. She didn't feel ashamed, she felt chosen. Not for what she hid, not out of pity, but for who she was, completely. She hid the feather not because she was afraid, but because she knew what its discovery would bring. Her father had been watching her with narrowed eyes since the fire. Her brothers whispered like cowards in corners. They could feel it, something in her had changed, and they didn't like it. That morning, she tried to leave the house as usual. Just a walk, she'd said before. But this time, she didn't make it past the fence. Her father stepped from the shed, shotgun slung over his shoulder, his eyes hard as gravel. "Where do you keep going?" "Nowhere," she said. "Just out." He stepped closer. Voice low, heavy with suspicion. "You think I don't hear things? See the way you come back? Glowing like some girl dreaming of fairy tales?" She didn't flinch. "I'm not chasing anyone. You've been seen with him." She didn't deny it. He laughed, no joy in it, just something bitter. "You already burned your name, now you want to throw your soul in the flames too?" "My soul is mine," she said, "and it's not broken." That's when he struck her. A backhand sharp, deliberate, meant to wound not just flesh, but spirit. She stumbled, caught herself, blood blooming on her lip. He raised the gun to shoot, but to point, like she was an animal to be run off the land. "You don't live under my roof anymore," he said. "Take your sins, take your silence, get out." Her mother stood in the doorway, eyes shining, lips closed. Her brothers stayed inside. No one stopped him. No one stood for her. She packed slowly, one dress, one worn Bible, and the feather sheet tucked it between pages, between Psalms and Proverbs, where prayer met defiance. By noon, she was walking alone. Dust clung to her boots, her ribs ached, but she didn't turn back. No wagon offered her a ride, no neighbor waved, no goodbye. She passed the chapel, but didn't stop. Instead, she followed the curve of the river, the hush of trees. Her feet knew the way. By dusk, she found it. A cabin hidden among the cottonwoods, timber and stone, smoke curling from the chimney. A horse grazed nearby, reins loose, calm. She hesitated. The door creaked open. He stood there. He didn't ask why she'd come. He didn't ask anything at all. He simply stepped aside. She crossed the threshold, not into a home, but into peace, into something that didn't demand her to shrink or explain. Still, he said nothing. But in that silence, she heard everything. The town said she vanished. Some claimed she fled in shame. Others whispered the outlaw stole her, carried her into the wild like a tale too scandalous to repeat. No one mentioned the bruises. No one spoke her name at church. At the house, her mother kept her room clean like a shrine. Her father never said her name except once, bitterly. She made her choice. But deep in the woods, beyond where roads faded to deer trails, she was learning to breathe again. The cabin was simple: 2 chairs, 1 bed, a stove. He slept outside most nights. By choice. She knew. She watched him through the window. Curled near the fire, blade in hand, carving bits of wood like they whispered only to him. He never touched her, never stepped inside unless she asked. She waited for a look, a gesture, a demand, but it never came. Only small acts. A cup of water on the table, a blanket shaken clean. A snare reset so she wouldn't go hungry. One night, as wind howled through the trees, she found him under the pines, arms folded, jaw tight against the cold. "You don't have to sleep out here," she said softly. He looked at her, didn't answer. But when she turned to leave, he followed. Inside, he sat by the stove. She added wood to the fire. They shared stew without words. He carved. She mended her dress. Time passed. When she finally lay down, she didn't ask him to stay. He simply did. He slept on the floor, hand over his heart, the other holding that carved feather like a promise. She watched him through heavy lids. Her breath slowed, her limbs warmed. No vows, no sermons, just trust. And somehow, that was stronger than any church wedding could ever be. At dawn, gold light slipped through the roof beams. She stirred and found him already outside. The fire hissed gently under a pot of boiling water, casting flickers of light across the cabin walls. It was a new day, simple, unhurried, the kind of beginning that whispered instead of roared. Life, she realized, should always start with small kindnesses and no fear. Later, they worked side by side, lifting stones to shore up the garden wall. Their words were few, their breaths in sync. Above them, a hawk sailed across the sky, its cry echoing sharp, lonely. She glanced upward and smiled. "I used to think I had to earn love," she said softly, not really expecting a reply. "Had to fold myself up quieter, gentler, less." He didn't look over, but he paused just long enough before saying 3 words. "You never did." The air caught in her throat. She didn't cry, not then. But that night, after he'd fallen asleep again on the floor, his blanket pulled around him like an old promise, she knelt beside him, touched the edge of the quilt and whispered into the dark, "Thank you for choosing me." He didn't move, but a slow breath left his chest steady, warm, the sound of a man who didn't need to speak to understand the weight of what had passed between them. Winter forced her back to town for the first time. They needed salt, oil, and flour. The snares had come up empty too many nights, and the creek had iced shallow. She volunteered. He didn't argue, just pressed a pouch into her hand, coins rubbed thin and a few bullets hammered into silver token sand, nodded. Ash Hollow hadn't changed. Same dusty faces, same signs swinging crooked in the wind, but she had no morning black, no bowing posture, just a rough coat, her hair braided down her back, boots caked in mud and pride. She passed Mr. Dunham's store. He looked up, blinked like he'd seen a ghost, then looked away. Inside, silence fell. A woman dropped a spool of thread. Someone whispered her name like it was something dangerous. She didn't flinch, bought what she needed, paid in full. As she left, she paused at the church steps. Pastor Tulliver stood talking to 2 men, their collars starched with self-importance. He turned as her boots crunched the gravel. For a moment, no one moved. "You're welcome inside," he said at last. "We've been concerned." She looked past him at the stained glass, at the lamb, silent and spotless. "No need," she replied. "God's walked beside me just fine in the woods." And she walked on. At the edge of the trees, he waited. Not on a horse. On foot. Arms crossed, still as stone, as if he'd known exactly when she'd arrive. She reached him, Sack heavy, he took it without question. They said nothing on the way home, but something had shifted like the ground had settled into place under their feet. That night, under the moon's pale blessing, he tied a strip of rawhide gently around her wrist. No ring, no altar, no witnesses, just two hands meeting in the stillness. She didn't ask what it meant. She didn't need to. The next morning, they sipped coffee beside the fire and patched the roof together. When a rancher passed nearby looking for a lost calf, they didn't duck. They stood in the open, unhidden, unashamed. The man tipped his hat, rode on. By spring, the rumors ran wild. She's living with him. She wears a Cheyenne token. They never married. She chose him. She wanted this. None of it mattered. Out where the cottonwoods whispered and the wildflowers bloomed without asking, a new life was forming, quiet, stubborn, and free. Each morning, she woke to the scent of pine in her hair and the carved feathers above their door. She didn't think of what the town once called her, only what he never had to. She was home. Years passed like rain down stone. She never moved back to town, but now and then, when supplies ran low or spring was kind, she would walk into Ash Hollow head high, boots dusty. Not a scandal anymore. Just a legend the town couldn't quite bury. The whispers changed, new faces, new dramas, but once in a while, someone would stop her on the road. "Do you miss it?" they'd ask. The real world, church pews, clean reputation. She'd smile. "I got everything I ever prayed for, just not the way you expected." Back at the cabin, life grew. He built a lean-to for drying herbs. She planted flowers along the porch. Birds nested in the eaves. Smoke curled from the chimney like a lullaby. They never had children, but they had peace. And that was enough. One fall, a boy went missing near the creek. His cries echoed through the trees then, scared. She found him by the stones, shivering and tear-streaked. She carried him back herself. People watched as she came into town, the child clinging to her like truth. They didn't speak at first, but someone handed her a blanket. Another offered warm bread. The boy's mother sobbed and thanked her. She just nodded, turned to leave. Before she could, a girl tugged at her skirt. 7, maybe, wide-eyed. "Are you the witch from the woods?" the child asked. Nola knelt, smiled softly. "No, sweetheart," she said, "just a woman who stopped pretending." The girl nodded, asked if that made all the sense in the world. Back at the cabin, Howrick Cole waited with bowls of stew and a half-finished flute across his lap. He didn't ask where she'd been, he never did. But he looked at her hands, still damp from carrying the boy, and he nodded. That night, as firelight painted the walls gold, she watched him from across the room, his eyes closed, his breath slow, the wind outside whispering through the cottonwoods like memory. She thought of the girl she once was. Laughed too loud, asked too many questions, told she was too much. Now, she was none of those things. She was more. Unmarried, untamed, but whole. They had no wedding photo, no name etched in a Bible, only the carved feather above their door, the hush of love that didn't demand anything but truth. Years later, after the war came and went, and the world screamed with telegrams and trains and men shouting into the void, someone wrote to the county office, "What happened to the woman who ran off with the half-blood from the woods?" The reply came brief. "She lives," it said, "with the man who never made her feel like shame." And maybe that is the best kind of ending there is. Because the world will always want you smaller to make itself feel big. But peace isn't found in being quiet. It's found in being seen. Loved for who you are. If this story stirred something in you, even a whisper, leave a word below. A name. A moment. A memory. So someone else might read it and remember they're not alone. And if you believe more stories like this deserve a voice, subscribe. We'll be here, waiting, in the silence that speaks louder than words.